I think our materialism has focused us so entirely away from these more rarefied layers that we cannot see them at all, that we in fact deny their existence. You know, in a way, what science, as practiced over the past 500 years, has come down to is it has been a relentless despiritualizing of the world, until finally, you know, they tell you there is no soul, there are no spirits, that what you see is what you get. We have risen to the surface. Well, a shaman looking at a person with that kind of a mental map of things just pities them, their simplistic stupidity. He says, you know, my God, you're like a half-wit or something, because everything interesting and complex you say doesn't even exist. So eventually you get into a situation of diminishing returns. For instance, you know, it was a great step forward for von Leeuwenhoek to grind his lenses and to see little animals cavorting in a drop of water. But for instance, now ordinary science is going to Congress and saying, in order to take another step deeper into the understanding of matter, we want $20 billion to create an instrument 17 miles in diameter that will take 30 years to build and that will allow us to at last confront the bottom quark or something like that. I heard these guys on NPR, probably some of you heard them, being challenged, particle physicists, being challenged by someone who said, well, you want America to commit, I think it was $50 billion to building the super collider. Can you name a single spin-off from particle physics that has trickled down into the lives of ordinary people? And they were absolutely stymied.
I kind of go with Peter Russell's theory that, you know, perhaps from our technological culture we did get something. You know, first of all, none of us would be here if it was not for technology, because today we have like close to 5 billion people on Earth. That might be a curse, but that also might be, you know, do you want to be the one who is not born? I mean,
a tricky question.
So in that fact of life explosion, there is one thing that happened, is that we do now have a conscious of ourselves as one planet, as one whole being. I mean, even with the technology of going to the moon, through the physicality, we have a view of ourselves from the outside. I mean, to me, I look at it like maybe in the evolution of humanity, it's like being 7 years old. You know, all of a sudden you say, but hey, I am me, you know, I am somebody, and I can decide, you know, to say no or to say yes, but it is something there is an entity. And as a planet, maybe that's what we did when we went to the moon. And the Indians, you know, I go down to Sweat Lodge every week and I participate with the Indian community down in San Pedro, so I'm trying to learn a bit the way they think. And a lot of things I enjoy very much, you know, but then other things, you know, I don't agree totally. For instance, with the moon thing, you know, they say, well, we've been to the moon many, many times before, and we go to the moon through the dream world. See, like you went to the Alps, but a lot of people go to the stars. I mean, there is a lot of other realities out there, and it's not the future and it's not the past, it's just life. It's part of that dense, rich.
But do you think that it's simply that there are a lot of realities? For instance, what puzzles me about these encounters with these elf things is the urgency from their side. You know, I could imagine just breaking into an elf ecology and seeing them busy making shoes and, you know, putting the blush on strawberries or whatever elves do. But they seem intently focused on a project that has consequences in this world, and that puzzles me. I don't think history has been a waste of time. I think probably it's served its purpose.
Yeah.
And that what we now have to do is take what we've learned. It's the prodigal son. I mentioned that.
Yeah.
And now return to the archaic family with the ability to move to the moon and to etch microcircuitry and to define the protein coats of viruses and these fancy things that we can do. All that is good knowledge, but it has to be linked to a coherency of self that we somehow have gotten so strung out on this scientific descriptive binge that we forgot why we're doing it and what this is all for.
The only thing I would say is that for people to hear us into this kind of a, rationality, I think it's good diplomacy not to put down the culture, not to discard it. I mean, I got a sense sometimes that, you just kind of discard it as, a kind of a neurotic error of humanity or something. I think, there is acknowledging what it has done, acknowledging it as a step, and, kind of saying, there are good things that came out of it, but now we are reaching a kind of a crisis level, an apotheosis, and now we are into a dark corridor where we have to make choice, we may have to change direction, we have to do, something drastic, because if not, it's going to be, a cataclysm for everybody.
Well, the basis of my criticism of science is not the science that it does, which it does very well, but the metaphysical pontificating that it claims to be able to do based on nothing more than its assumption that all competitors are naive. I mean, science should not be telling us what we should think about astrology, because astrology is not a proper object for scientific judgment. In other words, science is simply one method of understanding the world. But the people who practice science think it's a meta-method, think that it is somehow the arbiter of truth, and that we are supposed to take any proposition and lay it at the feet of science, and it will tell us whether it's kosher or not. Yeah. And that means that the scientists are completely out of their domain and should be sent back to the workbench and the test tube and stay out of the domain of metaphysics and philosophy, which is not properly their area.
That's part of the change, where we don't value strictly the material world. We have to bring back the value to the sacred, the mystery, the whole other aspect of life. And if as a culture we would change that, so that everybody would have a more balanced view of the universe, then the scientists would be automatically put back in their spot.
Physics and metaphysics need to merge.
Thank you.
Everybody talks here like there is truth. There may be no truth. It may all be nonsense. When you go on a hallucinogenic journey, I get the impression sometimes you feel you're bringing truth back. How do you tell the difference between truth and nonsense?
Or shit and shinola, as we normally...
It worries me that it's entertaining, but I still don't feel there's necessarily any truth.
Well, I don't know if you were at the lecture last night, but there was talk there about how one must not get clutchy about closure. There is no closure. There is no truth. You're quite right.
But I mean, there isn't even a direction of truth. It may just all be nonsense.
Well, if it's all nonsense, then we're in a hell of a fix.
Well, that's where we may be.
Wittgenstein had a slightly different notion that I think is more serviceable here. He said, what we want to do is we want to make statements that are true enough. Now, there's a monkey concept. That's what we want. We want to say things which are true enough. That means serviceable in the circumstance in which they are being applied. And that's or whatever, if you're solving tensor equations of the third degree, then in that domain. But the idea, you see, it's so crazy to think that talking monkeys could get anywhere near truth. I mean, do you think a sea urchin possesses the truth, or a macaw? Well, then why you? And especially when you realize, we do all this business in English, and we're utterly naive about the limitations of language. You can't even take someone like Derrida, for instance. Whatever the man's truth is, it can't even be exported into English without becoming gibberish, because when you read him, you can't understand him.
However, it's also look at not only the limitations of language, but the potency of it. There's reason to believe that consciousness itself is invented out of language. When we take pharaoh children out of the jungles that haven't had the adoption of abstraction into their lives, that it's almost impossible to bring them to humanness, to being human. So language is maybe incredibly potent. And as you suggest with these elves, that you're talking about a medium of pure language.
Or purer language.
Purer.
Yes, well, language, if you were to look at this planet and seek the thumbprint of a higher intelligence, God or the goddess or whatever, language is the thing to look at. I mean, this is the thing we do that is an incredible symmetry break with the rest of nature.
Do you think a dog can tell the difference between those stairs and that floor, or the rug and that, or even the flowers and that? He sees it as a continuum that simply is a texture. Like we look at this rug, we don't identify that spot from the rest of it. We just simply say it's a rug.
Well, an animal intelligence is suspended in the here and now. We have language seems to be a strategy for binding time. And notice that the entirety of evolutionary advance is a series of time-binding strategies. Once you possess language, and especially once you possess writing, the past is not so past as it used to be. It hangs around, and we begin to create a database of experience larger than any community of living people could ever have. And the past stays with us. This is both a blessing and a curse.
Notice that we have industrial cultures as a result of the accumulation of written language. That there's a simultaneousness between written language and agriculture, etc., and industrial culture.
Oh yeah, I don't have any problem with that. Somebody said language was created to lie. Yes, but it does it so elegantly and so well that the half-truths it tells are all that we can communicate. The truth cannot be said.